I am the pumpkin anthropologist! Just kidding. Hi guys! So, today, I am going to talk about the anthropology of ghosts.
I'm a ghost.
And not just because it's Halloween week, but also because I think I can use the anthropology of ghosts as a really nice way to show you what contemporary anthropology can look like. But before we get into the contemporary stuff, I want to give you a little bit of background information. Anthropologists have been interested in ghouls, ghosts, spirits, specters, apparitions since anthropology's earliest beginnings. Originally, when anthropologists went out into the field, they would study and document the rituals of groups of people surrounding death. And in pre-literate folk religions, they often summarize beliefs in one of two categories: animism and ancestor worship. Animism is the idea that non-human entities possess a spiritual essence, be it plants or animals or inanimate objects. And the term was coined by an anthropologist named Edward Tyler, who is actually credited as sort of a father of European anthropology. And originally, animism was considered to be a primitive mistake of attributing life to inanimate objects. It was framed in terms of European progress as the earliest pre-civilized form of religious belief. So, yikes, early anthropology promoting colonialism, but animism is still a really important anthropological concept used today. It's used to describe many communities and religious practices, be it the Shinto in Japan, a traditional religion which believes in spirits of nature called kami, or many traditional Native American religions, or even the New Age movement. So, the second term I mentioned, ancestor worship, also called veneration of the dead, is basically just the idea that the dead have a continued existence and that they have an influence over the lives of the living. And ancestor worship usually involves religious and spiritual rites expressed to either keep the vengeful dead away from the living or appeal to them for help and good fortune. So, for both Catholics and Protestants in Europe, All Souls' Day and All Saints' Day are expressions of this. When the faithful dead are remembered, families will light candles for them and leave flowers. In China, Buddhist and Taoist ghost festivals take place where offerings and ceremonies are given to honor ghosts who are thought to roam the earth seeking food and entertainment. So, anthropologists and archaeologists have always been interested in rituals having to do with ghosts, whether it be ritual sacrifices to satiate vengeful spirits or ritual bindings of the dead to make sure the souls reach the afterlife. And belief in spirits and ghosts is often described as a cultural universal, in the sense that these themes exist pretty much everywhere in some form or another, all over the world, in almost every culture. So, keeping all that in mind, nowadays, contemporary cultural practices around ghosts are often neglected in the social sciences. They're usually kind of dismissed as superstitious, and ghosts are only sort of looked at in the context of organized religious practice. But there are some anthropologists today who are really kind of taking a fresh look at the paranormal. And they're doing some really interesting things, looking at contemporary cultures and communities that organize around ghost belief. In the West, ghosts have found their way into our everyday lives, from TV series to haunted locations, sometimes made a spectacle out of, often believed to be hoaxes and money-making schemes. But there's gotta be something to this, right? A recent Harris poll showed that 42% of Americans believed in ghosts. A Gallup poll showed around 37%. And a poll in the United Kingdom showed 52% of UK residents believing in ghosts. So, what is it about humans that makes us believe in these things, or at least allows ghosts to capture our imagination? And how is this reflected in the way that people engage with ghost belief? Ghost belief is still really, really pervasive. Sorry about that, guys. I think we just lost power for a second. Anyways, as I was saying, ghost belief is still very pervasive. And there's a ton of cross-disciplinary literature that seeks to answer questions about ghost belief. But instead of trying to cram it all into this video, I'm going to take a slightly more in-depth look into one particular expression of ghost belief. And that is the American ghost hunting community. So there are a few anthropologists doing work on this subject, but there's a really great study by Joseph Baker and Christopher Bader, so I'm going to focus on their research for most of this video. They conducted participant observations and interviews with 3 different groups of ghost hunters, both the organizers of the hunts and the participants, and they took a very participatory approach. So that means that they engaged in the ghost hunting activities and then took extensive field notes afterwards, rather than just sitting as sort of outside observers. This is a pretty popular method of conducting ethnography and anthropology nowadays. In their fieldwork with ghost hunters, and by ghost hunters I mean people who search for evidence of paranormal activity and search to engage with spirits and ghosts, Baker and Bader identified 4 notable themes across the groups. So the first theme was appeals to science. The second theme was appeals to religion and magical rites. The third was technology having a role in constructing experience. And the fourth was narratives and folklore about death. So, the first theme found in these communities, appeals to science. Appeals to science were generally made in an effort to legitimize both the activities and views of the ghost believers, and also used to challenge the idea that we live in this disenchanted, fully rationalized world. So basically, scientific terms and scientific knowledge were integrated into these ghost hunting experiences in order to challenge traditional views about what may and may not actually be scientific. In other words, science used to show that ghosts do exist, rather than science being used to show that ghosts don't exist. And so one of the companies in particular really integrated a lot of science language into their ghost hunts, and they offered a ghost hunting class, which one of the researchers attended. So throughout this class, the instructor referenced quantum mechanics, parapsychology, and even Stephen Hawking's views of relativity. And every time science was mentioned, it was used to validate claims made about ghosts and also used to question conventional, rationalized understandings of reality. And according to Baker and Bader, experimental research shows that these kinds of appeals to science really help to increase the perceived legitimacy of paranormal claims. So if you use science to talk about ghosts, people are more likely to believe you when you say ghosts exist. So on one hand, you've got this scientific exposition going on within these ghost hunting communities. On the other hand, you have religious and spiritual explanations. So that's the second theme, appeals to religion and magical rites. In one of the groups, a sort of religious pluralism was expressed during ghost hunts. So they drew upon ritual practices and beliefs commonly referred to as New Age. And in this group, there was virtually no discussion of traditional religious versions of supernaturalism. So no discussion of any sort of traditional religions or Christianity, but there was an extensive integration of ideas from astrology, tarot, neo-paganism, and the occult. And these New Age elements were used to frame hauntings and often as a means of communicating with apparitions. So, similar to the first group I mentioned, in another group they studied, paranormal beliefs and practices and New Age ideas were integrated with beliefs in hauntings and integrated into the ghost hunts. But this second group also made use of traditional religion, such as Christian prayer, during ghost hunting experiences. So, in the third group that Baker and Bader observed in their study, there was an emphasis on traditional Christian religious beliefs and practices. And unlike these first two groups, who really drew upon a lot of New Age elements, the third group totally rejected any other stream of culture besides traditional religious beliefs, and particularly sort of outwardly stated that they reject anything having to do with New Age or paranormal. So in their ghost hunts, they would make frequent reference to Christian religious entities such as demons and Satan as being responsible for hauntings. And it's worth noting that there was actually competition between this third group and the second group I mentioned. They were located near each other and were competing for advantage in the market of ghost tours and services. So this third group really drew very firm distinctions between itself and the more generalist group. It really wanted to stay a Christian, non-New Age group. So there's definitely an economic and political side to this that's interesting for anthropologists to take a look at as well. In spite of their disagreements over the traditions they were drawing upon, all of these groups employed ritual prayers, blessings, and curses in effort to communicate with, control, or ward off spirits. And one group used ritual protection prayers to keep their bodies from being contaminated by spirits, so that they could be in communication with these apparitions without becoming completely possessed by them. Religious or not, New Age or Christian, there are similarities in the way that these groups mediate encounters with ghosts. And that brings us to our third theme, technology. In all three groups, ghost experiences were channeled through technological media. And according to our anthropologists, serious ghost hunting in the contemporary West requires things like digital thermostats, electromagnetic field readers, AM radio scanners, which are also called ghost boxes, night vision technology, and, of course, photography. And these various forms of technology allow participants to take measurements, set up quasi-experimental scenarios, and make interpretations of the data that they generate. By deriving meanings from this kind of ambiguous sensory information, participants can then use this information to affirm their shared cultural understandings of what's going on. So, in other words, people come in with a ghost story, the assumption that a place is haunted or possessed, and then they use the technology to confirm that particular narrative. And narrative is an important word. Perhaps the most salient trend in ghost hunting communities is the use of narrative to shape experience. So, among these three ghost hunting groups, Baker and Bader observed three primary forms of narrative. The first was a historical framing through death lore, and by death lore I mean folklore about death. The second was a shared interpretation of empirical or narrative information, so vicarious haunting experiences, one person looking through a camera and seeing something and everyone else sort of interpreting it. And the third is experiential recollection, so people basically speaking about their own personal experiences with ghosts. And they argue that hauntings and apparitions are pretty inseparable from the stories that frame them. In each of the groups studied, historical death lore was used to set the mood of a haunted location, and it was used to explain perceived anomalies detected via technology, and it was also used to reconstruct experiences, both before, during, and after ghost encounters. So, to kind of rehash and summarize all of this, through ethnography, we can start to see and deconstruct the processes going on when it comes to ghost belief within ghost hunting communities. And we can see how memory and historical framing and scientific explanation and technology are all used by people experiencing or wishing to experience encounters with ghosts. Through ethnography, we can also see the internal politics that go around between ghost hunting groups. And we can connect ghost experiences to religious belief. But most importantly, we can see that the paranormal matters to people. It's still a very important cultural phenomenon that shouldn't be cast off as simple superstition. So, this study is a very small piece of ultimately a vast amount of research in this field that ultimately contributes to a large body of work that will help us better understand humanity's relationship with ghosts, especially in an era of increasing secularism and skepticism. So, for those of you who made it all the way through this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found my little discussion of contemporary anthropology of ghost hunting and my little overview of the anthropology of ghosts to be informative and interesting. But definitely, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments section. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and yeah, I'll be back soon. Happy Halloween! See, I'm an anthropologist. Get it? Anthropologist? Yeah.